Yo, Kpaceguy here. What's going on YouTube? So there's been a lot of chatter lately in some of my videos about subwoofers and how to kind of calibrate it to match the rest of your system. So I decided to make this video just to give some enlightenment to you guys on how to do that, because it's actually a really tough thing. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to calibrate your subwoofers to match and blend with the rest of your system with or without calibration systems, whether you have an app or you have room EQ of some sort, or if you have a receiver with Odyssey or YPOW or MCACC, whatever you're using. If you don't have that, I'm going to show you how to effectively calibrate your system with your ear. And if you have the calibration systems, I'm going to show you how to use both your ear and calibration to fix your subwoofer. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have a good video. Let's get after it. So there are three really key things that I want to talk about in this video to really help you calibrate that sub so that it blends in really well. And the first thing I want to start with is crossover. We have to get the crossover right. So in a quick little example here, I have my Yamaha pulled up right now. This is the interface for my Yamaha, and I'll zoom in just a second. But I'm going to show you guys how to crossover. So what a crossover is in a quick, short explanation here. As you can see, you have a different range of frequencies. And so if I zoom in a little bit more here on the TV, you see that I have different numbers here. So for example, my Atmos speakers are at 80, my surround left and right, my bookshelf are at 60, as well as my center channel, and then my big floor standing speakers are at 40. So how you know what this is telling you is that the lowest number on the screen is where your subwoofer should be crossed over at. So for example, you're going to be crossing over your subwoofers to what your front speakers can play, whether it's a bookshelf, whether it's a satellite, whether it's a floor standard. That's where you're going to be utilizing the crossover. So my floor standing speakers, my big old Polk LSIMs, they get down to around 25-ish or so hertz. And so my subwoofer, I don't have to cross it over so high because my speakers play so low, if that makes any sense. So I cut it off around 40, but I crossed over my subwoofer at 50. And why did I do that? You want to cross over your subwoofers at 50, because you want the transition to be seamless. So what this means is that when my speakers start to reach around that 40 hertz range, it starts to roll off and hand the rest of the frequencies over to the subwoofer. So you want a nice simple exchange from 50 to 40. You don't want to cross your subwoofers at 40 if your speakers are crossed over at 40, because you're going to have a gap in the sound. You want to go ahead and pass the baton from the speakers to the subwoofer around 50 since you're crossing at 40. So if you're running satellite speakers and they play around 100 hertz, you want to have your subwoofer crossed at maybe 120. If you're using bookshelf speakers or a speaker that doesn't get too low, a good starting point is to cross it over at 80. So cross your speakers at 80 and let the subwoofers handle it all the way down. So that's how you're going to handle your crossover. Again, you just take your floor standing speakers, your bookshelves, whatever you're running in your front, left, and right, you're going to want to cross your subwoofer maybe 10 hertz or so higher than that so that your transition is seamless. Now, arguably, this might be the most important thing to get right with your subwoofers, and this is its phase. And on most subwoofers, you have a switch between 0 and 180. You can kind of toggle a switch, and for those who aren't sure what that does, that changes what direction the subwoofer is moving. So if you look on my Yamaha receiver here, if I zoom back in there on that television right there, you see it says normal and reverse. That just means in phase and out of phase. And I'll show you a little example for what in phase and out of phase is. So if you have two speakers, these are your two subwoofers right here. When these speakers are in phase, they're moving in and out at the same time, at the same rate. Up and down, up and down. If you change it out of phase, you're now moving out of sync. I guess you could say it that way. So when you're in phase or in sync, you're moving at the same time, the same direction. If you change one of your phases, let's say I change this speaker to out of phase and leave this in phase, now you're doing this. So if they're both on 0 degrees on the back of your subwoofer, both speakers are moving the same direction. If you flip a switch and go to 180, now they're moving in opposite directions. And if you have a variable zoom, which most people actually don't, but I'll show you on the SDS app here, which is really cool actually. SVS allows me to go in to my subwoofer settings and change that phase. So now instead of having 0 to 180, I now have everything in between. So that allows me to kind of more fine tune that phase to sound perfect. Now, this is really important when you're using more than one subwoofer. So let's say you have one in the front of the room and one in the back. You don't want both of them to be on 0 because you don't want them to be moving the same direction when they're across from each other, because what that causes is cancellation. That's when you have absolutely no bass at all. But if you flip your phase switch to at least 180, you're able to kind of recorrect that cancellation and get the bass you're supposed to be getting. So with this SVS app, it allows me to kind of more fine tune itself. And a lot of subwoofers, unless you're spending a good dollar, don't have this kind of option. You need to have a switch. Some may have a little dial on the back, but you're usually going to have the option between 0 and 180. If you're using 2 subwoofers in the front, you want them to be on normal or 0. And if you're going to have one subwoofer in the front, one subwoofer in the back, you want it on one on 0 and one on 180. If you can kind of play with it, then you can kind of get more of an option. As you can see here, I'm kind of just going through different options, 0 to 180. If you have one on the left side wall and the right side wall, you still want both of them to be on 0. When they're adjacent to each other, when they are across the room from each other, that's when you want to change it to 0. If you're using one subwoofer, but you have it in the back of the room, you can kind of play with this. I've had times where I've had to change it to 180, and I had to leave it there and it sounded better with my 4 setting speakers. There's been times when I had to leave it on 0. So you kind of have to play with it and keep your ear open. You really have to listen for this. That's really what's going to tell you what's the right setting. But if you're running 2 subwoofers, you really want to try to play with that phase because it's going to make a big, big difference. Another really important aspect to keep in mind when you're trying to calibrate your subwoofers is going to be volume. And this is probably one of the hardest things to get correct, because when you're listening to bass, it's usually harder to hear low notes than it is high notes. So people have an issue of trying to figure out what to match your volume to. Some people say you should match your subwoofer's volume to your tweeter of your speakers. Some people say you should match your subwoofer's volume to the mid-range of your drivers. It's really hard to tell, but it really comes down to preference and what you're going to be listening to. But there is a basic guideline to follow. So let's say I have 2 subwoofers, I have two PP4000s, right? And so how do I get those volumes to match the rest of my system? And it's actually quite easy. So you're going to need a nice music track. It doesn't matter which one, but it needs to have a good bass in it. You can listen to Spotify, TuneIn, YouTube, whatever you want to listen to, but make sure you're familiar with the track you're going to choose. Choose a track, then sit on the couch in your listening position and where you're going to be at. Close your eyes and just listen. And then tell me if you can hear where your subwoofer is coming from. If you can hear where your subwoofer is at in the room, then it's too loud. So how can we fix this? Take that music track that you have, turn that subwoofer way too high, way higher than you know it should be, and then close your eyes and slowly start to turn that volume down until you hear a blend between the bass and the rest of your system. That may be a little bit louder than your speakers. It may be a little bit softer than your speakers in relation to what volume you choose. So on the screen here, you see that my front, left, and right speakers are at 0 dB and plus 0.5 dB. But my subwoofers are at -3 dB. And that's a good sweet spot for my sound. And I'll tell you why. When I listen to a music track, I first cranked up my subwoofers way beyond the limits that it should be for what I'm listening to. And then I closed my eyes and I kind of turned it down slowly, 1 by 1, 1 decibel by 1 decibel, until it sounded like it was coming from the front speakers. And that's what you want to try to achieve. You want your bass to sound like it's coming from the front left and the front right, even though it's not. It's coming from the subwoofers. But that's how you know it's blended, when your subwoofers sound like they're not there, when they don't sound like they're in the room, in the corner, or in the back of the room. You don't want to hear where they are in the room, but you want to hear them nonetheless. So turn that subwoofer up all the way that you can, not all the way, but you know, to where it's at, where you know it's too much. And then close your eyes and slowly start to turn that volume down. And then listen to see when you stop hearing where it is, but you still notice that it's there. You want it to integrate with the speakers that you're going to be using. So it doesn't matter what speakers you have, whether it's big floor setting speakers like I have here, or maybe it's small satellite speakers like the one I have up there. It does not matter at all. The same principles apply. You want to turn your subwoofer up just a little bit too much and then dial it back until it sounds like it's coming from the speakers that you have. That's how you're going to get a seamless transition between your speakers and your subwoofer. That's how you're going to have a cohesiveness, a cohesion between everybody in the system. You're going to have a really good sound. So that's the way that I calibrate my subwoofer's volume. It's not necessarily in relation to what you're going to be using as far as your tweeter or your mid-range. It's not in relation to that per se. It's more of what you're listening to. If you're listening to movies, if you're watching movies all the time, I kind of have my subwoofers cranked up just a little bit more than usual because I'm watching a movie. You really want the explosions to come through, the thunder, the plane crashes, things like that. You want your subwoofer to be a little bit higher because you want to feel that that bass, that rumble. But when you're listening to music, that's when you really want to have that kind of sound kind of tuned in to your speakers so you're not hearing your subwoofer too much. So that's how you're going to calibrate the front speakers to your subwoofer. So there you go, guys. That's going to do it for this video. I really wanted to help you guys try to get your subwoofer tuned into your system because it's so hard to do. And you can do this with or without any kind of room correction. Your ear is going to be the best correction you're ever going to have. There's nothing out there that's going to do better than your ear. And of course, everybody listens to different things and they like it a different way. So you're going to be the one who decides if it sounds good or not. These are just basic rules and guidelines to kind of get you started, and then you can tweak it from there. So of course, most receivers have calibration nowadays, so you can go in and let your receiver guess where it should be, and then go in and make corrections to it because it's going to be wrong 100%. Do not rely on it. It's going to be wrong, so go back in and fix it the way you like it. Get those distances right, get that level right. I forgot to say throughout this video, but for example, my SVS speakers, when I calibrate my system, I have it on -10. You usually want to have your subwoofers at halfway point, at the halfway point of your subwoofer. Put that dial on halfway, then run calibration, and then go back and fix it. Never turn the volume up on your subwoofers at all. Leave it at halfway at all times and change the settings within the receiver itself. Use that as your basis, as your guidelines, but leave your subwoofer at halfway at all times and then make your adjustments in the receiver. That's where you're gonna get most of your results from, and that's you can actually see what you're doing on the screen. So that's just a rough guideline. There's a lot of more things that we can do to make your subwoofer sound good, but I think that's a good starting point, guys. So if you have any other questions, leave them down below in this video. Ask me whatever you want. I most likely know the answer, and if I don't, I will definitely find the answer for you. So leave me a comment down below. How are your subwoofers performing? What subwoofers are you using right now, and are they integrated? Run that calibration and make sure you have it correct. Check your settings. You can always fine tune. Nothing's ever perfect. So leave me a comment down below. What subwoofers are you using? Have you ran calibration? How do you like your sound? What are you watching? Are you listening to music? Are you watching movies more? Let me know down below. Hit that like button if you thought this video was informative and it helped you even just the slightest. And smack that subscribe button with your elbow if you can. I challenge you to hit that if you got a touchscreen, use your nose. If you have a mouse, hit that mouse button with your elbow. I'm challenging you to hit that subscribe button. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Kpaceguy out.